I don't know if either of you have any background with multiple sclerosis, but if someone said, I have a 60-year-old woman had multiple sclerosis, would you recommend they go on a whole food plant-based diet? Would it move the needle? Would it do anything? And you can answer that for any other conditions that are related to multiple sclerosis.
I just comment, there's a famous dietary pattern based on the chief of neurology in, I believe it was Portland of Oregon, University of Oregon, Dr. Swank, maybe Eugene Swank, if I remember, he's deceased. And he was fascinated, his clinical focus was multiple sclerosis. And he had some observations that then he applied on using very low saturated fat diets. And generally, if you want a very low saturated fat diet, you're going to get a largely plant-based diet. And it was a unique patient observation because it was 50 years of follow-up. Dr. Swank lived to a pretty old age. And some of these patients he personally followed for 20, 30, 40 plus years. And actually, there's 50-year data. And he reported the biggest deficit was, most people would say, if you're going to say you've halted or even made some advancement in multiple sclerosis, you need MRI data showing improvements in white matter changes. At the time, Dr. Swank was practicing, he didn't have that baseline and follow-up MRI data. It was all just clinical observation. But he reported in peer-reviewed published data that this low saturated fat, largely plant-based diet was beneficial in multiple sclerosis. The other dietary pattern that's out there is, why am I blanking on my nice friend who's at University of Iowa, and she's an internist, and she had multiple sclerosis. David, if you remember the name of who I'm talking about, she's an MD, a compelling story of being in a wheelchair and being able ultimately to walk and even do some light jogging because of a diet that was, 9 servings of fruits and vegetables. Terry Walls, WAHLS, MD, TERY Walls, MD. And there's a very popular book. And, there's a plant-based version and an almost plant-based version, but one of the cleanest, organic, high-fiber, microbiome-friendly diets on the planet. And she's actually, to her credit, published some peer-reviewed data also on the impact, and many people follow that. So look up the Swank diet and look up the Walls diet and, eat 9 servings of, greens and blueberries and nuts and seeds, and you probably will do something good for your brain.
I thought the name you were looking for, Joel, was Saray Stanchik, who also...
Oh, that would be another plant-based one. Thank you. Yes.
Right. Saray, who did the documentary Code Blue, had an autoimmune condition, turned to plant-based nutrition, and had a dramatic recovery. The answer to your question, Steve, is a simple yes. I would highly recommend whole food plant-based nutrition. It's dramatically anti-inflammatory. It's vital support for the nervous system, the circulatory system. It minimizes your exposure to compounds that really should be no part of human nutrition, which are often immune system stimulants. And yeah, Joel, I think great comments. And to my knowledge, the Swank diet also recommends high intake of omega-3, so low intake of saturated fat. So it's often richly supplemented with omega-3 fatty acid. And for vegans, you can get that not directly from fish, but from algae, and I'd highly recommend that. The omega-3s that have the widest array of anti-inflammatory effects, specifically on the CNS, are the long-chain omega-3s, and they're typically associated with fish and marine life. But the fish and marine life are getting them from algae. And there are vegan supplements that derive long-chain omega-3. So we're not talking about ALA, alpha-linolenic acid, which is the omega-3 you find in nuts and seeds, but icosapentaenoic acid, docosahexaenoic acid, the long-chain marine oils. You can get them directly from algae. So I would add that at relatively high dose if I were actively treating MS. And I've seen in some of my patient care dramatic responses to plant-based nutrition. And I think these benefits extend not just to MS as a specific condition, but to any autoimmune state. And often in these conditions, we can measure markers of inflammation and see how they improve with an anti-inflammatory diet. And there's nothing more anti-inflammatory than optimal plant-based nutrition. In some cases, we don't have inflammatory markers, and then you're just tracking symptoms. But I think it's a very pertinent recommendation. And really the only rate limiting thing is the willingness of any given patient to give it a go.
Thank you. We're going to have a speaker named Nathan Bryan, who wrote a book on nitric oxide. And if you read the book, he basically, my interpretation is to eat greens and eat them a lot, and that there's tremendous benefits to kale. And it seemed like a wonderful book. And then the conference, we had all these speakers saying greens are fantastic. It's a fundamental part of a whole food plant-based diet. And then we had a dentist who's not vegan, and she said that she sees patients, and because of oxalates, they have teeth problems and bone problems. And she said she had a patient who had their teeth were getting worse because too many oxalates. Now, this is contrary to almost everything I've ever heard on greens, but I don't want to be dismissive. I don't study this, so I don't really know what is. And then, that Sally Norton wrote that book, Toxic Superfoods, and she had a whole thing about oxalates. So a lot of us really want to embrace sprouts and greens, and we really want to get the benefits of it. But we are a little bit concerned when people say that we should be concerned about oxalates. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I'll take the first part. I'll take Nathan Bryan, and I'll leave oxalates for Dr. Katz. Nathan is a friend. I've interviewed him multiple times. He's written some he has several companies that make, he calls them nitroceuticals because they emphasize nitrates through beets and other natural products. He's, a PhD. He's done research on this. Of course, the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1998 was for the three gentlemen that led to the discovery of the critical role of nitric oxide in vascular health and total body health. You have to be careful when you interview Nathan Bryan because he is a Texan and has a cattle ranch, and don't go talking diet with him because he's a big time beef eater. So it doesn't work well in some of the plant-based summits and symposiums that are going on, but I still respect his science. And, yes, chewing greens, eating beets, watermelon, pine nuts, they either contribute dietary nitrates or contribute citrulline. That's what watermelon does so well. Pine nuts contribute citrulline. So you can enhance your vascular health through certain intelligent dietary choices. Of course, the famous Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn talks about if you're having symptomatic heart disease, trying to enhance your nitric oxide production by eating greens, steamed greens, a little balsamic 5-6 times a day. I find my patients incredibly challenged by that. And most of them don't have, symptomatic heart disease. So I tell them back off a little bit. It's not really a compatible thing to do for the rest of your life unless you're highly symptomatic. But I'll give oxalates and anti-nutrients to Dr. Katz.
Yeah, and Joel, that's exactly the framework I was going to bring up. So there are anti-nutrients or anti-metabolites in all foods, and famously, you can find carcinogenic compounds at very low concentrations in organic broccoli. So this to me is a classic instance of failing to see the forest for the trees. So if you fixate on a given moiety, compound, molecule in a food, and you explode that out and focus just on that and say at high dose exposure in an unbalanced dietary pattern, this anti-nutrient can cause all kinds of problems. Therefore, avoid the food. What you're failing to consider is what are the net effects of eating that food in the context of a healthy diet over lifetimes and generations. And frankly, we have that evidence. We have evidence from short-term intervention trials, but we also have evidence from large-term, long-term ethnography looking at whole populations who've lived on plant-based diets. And oxalate excess is not causing harm. Now, if you have a very unbalanced diet, if you're just eating leafy greens and you don't have a balanced portfolio of foods, then the net effect of anti-nutrients becomes more of a concern. But, it's interesting, Joel. Obviously, the circles we travel in, and frankly, Steve, you too, and the audiences that assemble for this conference, you can't help but notice when you get together with people who are eating plant-based diets. So, they're, for the most part, lean, healthy, vital, glowing skin, healthy hair, long-lived people. That's not anecdote. You know, when you get together with 2,000 people at the American College of Lifestyle Medicine annual meeting, it's just, you know, it's shocking how vibrantly healthy the audience is on average relative to any other health conference you could attend, but for the conferences that attract, you know, people with similar dietary inclinations. So oxalates are clearly not doing any harm in the context of a healthy, balanced diet. So sure, you could have an unbalanced diet. What we're hearing from this dentist is an anecdote, but what do we know about this patient? What do we know about what else they were doing? What do we know about their other behaviors? What do we know about their baseline health? And what do we actually know about their diet? So, you know, it may have been somebody who was experimenting with a vegan diet, did it badly, had a very unbalanced diet, and perhaps there was some harm. It's possible to succumb to harm from anti-nutrients, but the net effect of foods that promote health is health promotion. And yes, they do carry along some anti-nutrients, oxalates in the mix, but it comes out in the wash when you're eating wholesome foods in any sensible, balanced assembly. So not concerned.